Roger, man, if people could see behind the scenes on all of the things we do sometime, getting all the technical hookups for this podcast to record and work, they would be amazed. And what else they would be amazed at is that on your end, you're the IT person.
Yes, sir. That is true.
I wish I would have just recorded that while ago. And I said, Roger, do you have someone you can call? Is there someone that could come by or talk to you on the phone and answer questions and maybe help us get through this situation? And you said, no, it's pretty much me. Amazing, brother. We got your podcast to record this morning.
Oh,
did I wake you up?
Is that what we're doing all this work for? Who would have known?
Roger, are you in a mood?
No, I'm fine. I'm right here. I have just reworked an entire world over here in the last 15 minutes.
You know what's amazing is, and it is so often in today's world, you can trace down where stuff is plugged in and this is jacked to that, and you've got the wrong jack from the wrong microphone and the wrong place. And so we have those kind of things in the studio all the time, but most of the time, not even some of the time, most of the time, if you will just turn your computer off and shut it down and then turn it back on and everything works.
And usually everything gets back to working again.
It's like it's magic, man. Okay. Well, it's the day when we do this. And I for one, I'm really up to do this podcast.
I'm so glad.
I've been awake 20 or 30 minutes already.
Good for you.
And okay. So before we get started, did you have anything you wanted to tell me? I mean, do you need to give me some show notes or anything before we take off on this adventure? What again?
No, I trust you. Let's just, Buana, you just lead me through the jungle, okay?
We are living perilously close to the edge right now. I meant to say perilously close to the edge. But we are, you and I, we're going to go forward now. Let's kick this thing off. Roger Dykes Just Sayin. Hello, I'm Michael Shawn, and welcome to Roger Dykes Just Sayin. Roger Dykes is a teacher and counselor with a master's degree in family counseling from Texas Tech University. He is the owner of UV Blake Records and has written a book titled Non-Persons Rolling in a Normal World. And there's a few more things. Roger was born with cerebral palsy. Now a quadriplegic, he has been confined most of his life to a wheelchair. And for a while, even enjoying a career as a stand-up or sit-down comedian and after-dinner speaker. Disabled? Yes, but you forget about that pretty quickly because Roger thrives. So here is Roger Dykes.
Tell me when it's over.
You, sir, are a consummate professional.
Good morning, Michael. We're glad you could be here. We're glad we're hooked up now because we spent some time a little bit perilously wondering if we were going to do a podcast today because my microphone wasn't working.
Roger, I would be happier, though. I would be in a better mood if I had some little finger sandwiches and that sort of thing being brought to us about now.
I need their fingers to feed them to me, though. I don't work.
That's a caregiver joke.
I don't work well with finger food. My fingers don't feed well.
Roger,
knife and fork.
You know, we want to go and say this, folks. Roger, who feels like that a lot of his days end up maybe in a little bit of a rut because he is working on one project or another. But when a project stalls, and I don't know of a better word to use, because for one reason or another, things in Austin were moving along and things were great, and all of Roger's things that he was wanting to accomplish with our state capital concerning the tight-fisted rules and regulations of the system that he is asked to work under, which no longer is effective because of, well, inflation, for one thing. But the point is that all of that kind of stalled. I don't know if it was a big golf weekend or whatever, but they are certainly watching the new COVID wave and some things like that now. And for one reason or another, the lines kind of just went dead. Now, understanding that, from years and years of experience, Roger is, well, he has certainly been to a rodeo or two and knows how all of this stuff works. But then he will tend to feel in times like this, well, he doesn't really have a lot to talk about. And I reminded him before we went on that I've known him for a lot of years. I'm never worried about having something to talk about with Roger Dykes. And so that was the crux of our conversation before we went on just now. Roger?
Yes, sir. What would you like to talk about?
I'd like to talk about what you're sipping on over
Coffee.
there. Is that's not an adult beverage, is it? It's a little early in the morning for that.
Well, it depends on whether you consider coffee to be an adult beverage. So for many children, it probably would be. They probably wouldn't like it.
Okay. Roger, we were talking about something interesting before we went on. And of course, a couple of times you said, of course, this is not something we would want to talk on the podcast about. It's a very personal thing for you. I'm going to bring up portions of that conversation because I was struck. You know, you think you know a guy. You think you more or less understand their world. And then all of a sudden something will happen and you realize, I'm guilty of that. I feel that way because I've known you so long. I take for granted that you're going to be able to just handle things like you always do. And sometimes the smallest little change in your world around you has a ripple effect that is quite a deal for you to have to handle. Now, I want to give you an example of what I'm talking about, folks. The fact that a simple thing that we all take for granted is being able to get up on Sunday morning and go to church. And not just any church, but a church that you have spent a major portion, if not all of your life being involved in, that you teach courses and do counseling. And they simply, a lot of times, just depend on you showing up because you have always done so much to help yourself in so many situations. And people begin to take for granted. In fact, they begin to forget the massive amount of disabilities that you deal with continually every day, and it never slacks off. It is your life. And we take for granted, I take for granted that you just handle things. And when, for instance, caregivers due to sickness or whatever get jumbled up and not able to just appear, or a simple thing like a driver to come and get in your van with you, and that you can, roll into in your wheelchair and ride along and that sort of thing. And you told me an interesting story about your first option, and there was a perfectly logical reason why they weren't going to be able to be here. And then your second option, and then suddenly there was a personal reason why they couldn't be here, a family member, and with COVID. And then your third option, the bottom fell out on that too. And every person in that lineup were people that generally you can count on because they care about you, and yet are unavailable. And there comes a point when you're just left there.
I had a friend once. I did have one once, but I had a friend that made the following statement. He said, not regarding church necessarily, but just my life in general. He said, "You're the first person I've ever been around that spent 80% of their time figuring out how they were going to get to the location where they were going to do 20% of the work." So my world is so captivated by my disability and my needs of transportation, for example, that a lot of times I spend far more time, trying to arrange transportation than I'm going to spend doing whatever it is I'm going to do when I get there.
Yeah.
And people do not understand. And it's not just me, Michael. I have admired for many years the older people in a congregation who are there. I know some of it where I go to church, they get up at 5 a.m. to start getting ready to get to church by 8 o'clock. Now, that's remarkable to me that they're that dedicated, because it's easier just to stay home.
Yeah, and watch it on television or stream it on the internet or something.
Whatever. But they feel a necessity to be in that building at the right time, doing the right thing for the right purpose. And I admire that of them, and I have the same situation here. I have friends that will help me out. I don't want to sound like I'm friendless at all, but trying to work schedules out, trying to work around their schedule and what they can do and what they can't do is a major issue. And it affects my world basically on a daily basis, because I'm so dependent on my caregivers and friends and neighbors or whatever, filling in the blanks, because we're going to repeat something we've said many times, but it still comes back to the same thing. The state, in setting up this program that I'm on, which I'm, again, very thankful for, but they take for granted that you've got a support system of family living around you that will pick up the slack on anything that doesn't get done. And normally, I'm sure that's true. However, as we've said many times, I don't have any physical family here.
Right.
So therefore, there is no one to pick up any slack on anything, and I'm totally dependent on the paid personnel, the friends, and the neighbors. And therefore, it makes it a very challenging world for me to exist in.
Well, and we have said before, we get emails and actually gotten a letter or two sent to the studio here. And I know that you've received correspondence from listeners to this podcast. And one of the things that they will ask, so what can I do to help? How can we help? It's not really that simple, is it?
No, it isn't. No, helping me is difficult because I don't need, it wouldn't help me to get money. Not that anyone's offered.
Right,
okay?
Right.
But money would not solve my problem from an individual. It has to be money from the government. Now, additional money from the government would be wonderful. That would potentially help.
And that's for the people who don't know that. They may not, you've explained that 2 or 3 times, but just right quick, if the government sees an income, even in the form of a gift, then it can upset the whole apple cart, as my grandma used to say. And on your entire system, you can be cut off because of that.
I have been cut off because of that. Fortunately, I was put back on rather quickly. But yes, money showed up that I actually didn't get, but it looked like I did. And within a week, I got a notice that I was no longer eligible to be on the program. And I called the person here in Lubbock at that time, who's not here anymore. But I called that person. I said, "What's going on?" And she graciously made phone calls and got me back on. But yes, they are very, very, very strict about income. And we're talking now specifically about supplementary security income, which is a form of, it's not Social Security, but it's overseen by Social Security. So this is a federal problem. But the federal problem is that they have extremely low limits on what you can make and what you can have and what you can do. They were arranged specifically in 1972, and it has not been updated to any great degree since.
How many people could live on a family budget that was designed in 1972?
Right. And that's what we're dealing with. So there is talk right now in Washington, D.C. about, there are some senators, whatever, who are trying to get this particular program, the SSI program, looked at and updated into a realistic situation. Should they be able to do that, or when they're able to do that, it will definitely make a difference and make things a little easier to deal with than it is now. But right now, I cannot make, I don't remember the exact numbers, but I can, for example, now this number I do know, in savings and in things I own, I cannot, if I have more than $2,000, I can be cut off the program. Well, in today's world, $2,000 is nothing.
Yeah.
But I cannot have more than that. So I have to always monitor everything and make sure that I spend my money, which I hate doing. I hate having to spend money just to stay poor. But I do have to stay poor in order to stay on this program. So it is a challenge to stay on the program and to work within their rules. They need to update those rules so that they fit more with the society we currently live in.
Roger, I would like to say there's a word that comes to my mind, and the word is...
Be careful. This is a family show.
The word is absurd.
Oh, okay.
Roger.
That we
the
can
whole thing becomes absurd. And the further it goes in this day and time, the more absurd it gets. And all that you've been asking is, whoa, wait. Let's revisit this. And when you do it, it doesn't need to be a bunch of guys sitting around in a room somewhere that have really no idea what it's like to live the life that you live, but instead talk to the people that are working directly within their program and know exactly what they're talking about. You, sir, are one of the best examples of that I have ever known. But all we're suggesting is that they get the information to make decisions from people who are where the rubber meets the road, so to speak.
Well, let me give you a quick example of something I don't understand. And it's probably my fault for not understanding, but I do not understand what difference it makes as to whether I have $1,000 or $5,000 or $10,000 up to a limit. I think there'll be a limit you have to put out there because they don't want multimillionaires living off the government. Those are called politicians. But they don't want that to happen. They do not want that to happen. But what I'm saying is, if I have a bank account above poverty level, why does that affect? Why should that keep me off the program? I'm not asking for more money on that level. I'm asking for the idea of. I'm asking for the idea of we need to look over the situation and change it to where I can have a living amount of money.
Roger, would it possibly be that there is a fear that they would appear less than accountable, and so they need to keep this death grip on the funds that they are releasing to the people they're supposed to be helping? Can you see that from their point of view? What if someone came in and said, you're wasting the money, or you're being frivolous and allowing these people to, with the word steal funds from you?
Well,
is that what this is all about?
Well, part of it is that because they are paranoidly worried about Medicaid fraud.
Yeah.
And they are overextending they're to a point of not wanting to trust anybody. And I realize there are people who will take advantage of it. I'm sorry that's true, but yes, it is. However, I'm content that the majority of Americans in my condition and conditions like mine would not be here trying to bilk the government out of additional funds. We're simply trying to exist with the funds they'll let us have. And so there is that concern. But I think even as big a concern, maybe on an equal basis, is they just have not looked at any of these programs. They've just sat there idly by because the number of people on these programs is relatively small compared to other programs. Plus, as we've talked before, the disabled people of America do not have the voice that the other people have because of one thing, and it's called money. The people with money who can support politicians and have politicians reelected generally get more attention than those who are strictly here, who cannot fund anybody's campaign and are at the behest of the government.
So you're actually saying that it doesn't matter how disabled you are. It doesn't matter that you can't even lift your head out of bed in the morning or go to bed until a caregiver from somewhere shows up, possibly after midnight, and puts you to bed, and you have nothing really you can say about that because of the way you are, for lack of a better term, hamstrung into the system that you're in.
That is pretty much the case. There's a lot of issues, but again, and I know I keep repeating myself, I do this to defend the government, because the government has one idea, which is incorrect, but nonetheless, they sincerely believe that everybody's got family that's going to cover these things. In other words, you're not going to be misput very long before a family member is going to come in and fix it.
Let me ask you a question, because this is where it really gets hardcore. And I know, because you and I have talked about this before, that there is a really intelligent answer to this question I'm going to ask you. And I'm assuming we're going to get that here. When I say, Roger, what would you say to the people that said, look, I have listened to this podcast, I have heard this situation over, and the fact is things are the way they are. And the people in Austin are more concerned about this other stuff right now, and we'll get to you when we can get to you. But in the meantime, Roger Dykes, what we need to do with you is we need to put you in a home somewhere. We need to park you over there, and all of your needs will be met, and you'll be just fine. What would you say to those people, Roger?
Well, the first thing I would say is that's the whole reason for this program was to keep me out of that home. So you've actually shot the program in the foot when you go to that extreme. Secondly, it's far more expensive on the taxpayer to keep people like me in a nursing home facility than it is to keep me in my home here where I live. So I'm saving you money, or they're saving you money, if you will, by keeping me here as opposed to putting me into that home. Third, my world, it would be completely shut down. I could live that way. If that's the way it turns out, that's the way it turns out. I'm willing to accept that. But the reality is that everything I do, the productive activity that I have, as you mentioned at church or in counseling or whatever it is I do, would stop, because none of it could be done within the confines of a nursing facility, simply because it's run from electronic gadgetry that I have here in my house, much of which the state has paid for, and of which I use continuously, and I'm very grateful for. But when I get to the nursing home, none of it can come with me, because it is well known that in nursing homes, things disappear overnight if they have much value. And so you don't want to take any kind of electronic equipment, computers, that sort of thing, into a typical nursing home situation. So there's three very good reasons why we would like to keep it the way it is. And if it goes the other way, it will change my life. Now, I can live with that if that's what happens, but understand that Roger's limitations are going to be exaggerated at the nursing home, not improved.
So what you're basically saying is, folks, if that is your solution, that made-up listener that I just talked about, if that is your solution, then your solution is to spend more money and devastate Roger's world and the things that he accomplishes every single week. What Roger's saying makes sense. It makes dollars and cents for the taxpayer.
Well, and also, Michael, let's make sure we have the listeners understand that we're not talking about Roger. We're talking about hundreds or thousands of people in the state of Texas who will be put, if you use the logic you just mentioned and put all of them into nursing homes. I'm not sure there's enough nursing homes that can carry everything. Oh, yeah. Also, throw in one more thing. Right now, today, there are many, many nursing homes that are not accepting patients because of COVID. And I really don't know what would happen if everything shut down today in my world, where I would go, because I'm not sure there's any facilities around here that are open that could take me in anyway.
Well, and we don't even need to talk about that anymore, because clearly that is not the answer.
Right.
And that's the point of bringing it up, because there will always be people out there who are not really fully aware of your situation and all the things we've talked about, who will jump to that knee-jerk reaction, and it is just wrong on so many levels.
Yes, sir. I agree with you.
And we're thankful for those facilities and the people that are in there that needed to go there.
Absolutely.
But so we're not saying that. We are saying that you are an individual case, and there are hundreds, if not thousands, of individual cases just in the state of Texas like you, at a state of disability that requires caregivers and a lifestyle that you, quite frankly, Roger, have learned to negotiate and navigate your way through. And all we're asking is that we continue to do what for decades has worked for you. But the dollars and cents don't match up anymore.
Right.
Why would they? Yeah.
Again, when you've not looked at a program in almost 50 years, it's probably a little bit behind the times.
Roger, now, if you weren't doing this podcast this morning, if we hadn't dragged you over and put you in front of the microphone, which I appreciate, what would you be doing right now? And there's a point to this, but let me just say, what would you be doing right now, right this minute?
Watching college football.
That's it. Roger is, in fact, through and through a West Texan, where college football and high school football, for that matter, is sort of, dare I say, a religion of sorts. And it's something you pay attention to. And I'm glad to see you too do that, Roger.
Absolutely.
Are you a big Texas Tech guy? Is that what you?
Well, I'm aware of Texas Tech, and I understand that the more teams that leave the Big 12, the better chance Tech has of winning the conference. We can still beat Kansas. But I understand they're putting 3 more in now, so our chances just dropped again.
Yeah. That's true. That's a little bit of a mixed blessing there, isn't it? All right. Well, now there's one more thing. With your permission, sir, I want to mention pro football.
Okay.
And that is just the other night, and we don't talk about timely stuff like this in a podcast because a podcast takes on a life of its own and kind of lives forever. But I will say, just the other night, the Dallas Cowboys and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers had a heck of a football game. And it was pretty close to going back and forth quite a few times. But the thing about that was, I'm a Texan. And when you're a Texan, you're always one way or another sort of a Dallas Cowboy fan. And but lately, so many things have just been kind of off kilter with the Dallas Cowboy organization. And you keep thinking every year, this is the time when the boys are coming back. And then you see, but this game, if I could pick one other team, it would be Tampa Bay. There is just something about that team. And when they were playing the Cowboys, I thought, you know what? I have mixed emotions here. Do you ever feel mixed emotions when you're watching some of these guys play?
No, I've not had a mixed emotion about the Cowboys since Jerry Jones bought it.
Well, okay. Yeah, me too. But the point is this: when Tampa Bay pulled it out, when the Tampa Bay Buccaneers wound up on top of the Cowboys, I had to smile. And I thought, if I could pick one team to just whoop up and beat the Cowboys, that would be the one I would pick. Well, and I think there are a lot of people that still like to pay attention maybe to the NFL, even with all the bad press, and feel that way about certain teams. And that was one for me. Well,
I was a dedicated card-carrying member of the Dallas Cowboy fan club.
We all were. Yeah.
Until Tom Landry was fired. And while he was getting older and probably needed to retire.
That was unthinkable. Yeah.
I thought he should have been given the opportunity to retire rather than be fired. And at that point, even though they came back and won Super Bowls after that, I've never been the Cowboy fan I was. And right now, the problem, I can isolate it for you very quickly. What's wrong with the Dallas Cowboys? It's called Jerry Jones. Because the man wants to run the show, be the quarterback, and coach the team.
Roger, I would just like to say now that we want to put out an official message to the Dallas Cowboy organization. You can do that when you have a worldwide podcast, Roger.
Absolutely.
An official message to the Dallas Cowboy organization that we strongly suggest that they get in touch, the coaching staff get in touch with Roger Dykes to get some good, solid counseling and lead them forward, Roger. They need to hear from you.
Well, no, they don't need to hear from me. Jerry Jones needs to hear from me. So let's move it up. Let's move it up, and let's get Jerry to call me, and I can give him some pointers on what he needs to do.
Oh, Roger, my dear friend, we're scraping the bottom of the barrel when we start talking about pro football. But, man, as always, this is such a thing that I look forward to, doing this podcast with you. We're about out of time. Did you know that?
I didn't realize that. My sundial stopped.
We're running and gunning, Roger. And as always, it is good to hear from you. We, of course, come back every 3 weeks with one of your podcasts. And maybe by then, Roger, do you expect to maybe have heard some things out of Austin and begin to move forward on some of your issues?
Probably. I haven't got as much hope of that right now as I do walking, but nonetheless, miracles might still happen, and maybe I will hear from them. I hope so.
Always the positive attitude.
Absolutely.
Dear brother, will you take the rest of the day off?
Well, I'm going to turn on the college football game and start watching it now.
All right. Thanks a million, Roger. We'll see you in 3 weeks.
Thanks for coming by, Michael. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Roger Dykes Just Sayin. If you'd like to get a message to Roger, his Facebook account is listed as Roger Dykes. Become a friend, or you can send your questions and comments to rogerdykes51@gmail.com. That's ROGERDYKES51@gmail.com. Our podcast reveals a new episode every 3 weeks. Rollout is on Wednesday evening, shortly after dark, Texas time. Join us next time for our next episode of Roger Dykes Just Sayin. I'm Michael Shawn. On behalf of Roger Dykes, thanks for listening.